Good morning, good noon, and good afternoon, NAGC. Welcome to the May 15 edition of Webinar Wednesdays. I am your host, Bethany Hornbeck, current Professional Development Director with the Association, and I am very happy to have you with me on my last day as your Webinar Wednesday host, at least until I pick up professional development duties in the future. Thank you all for joining me as on my last day as your Webinar Wednesday host, thank you all for joining me over the last 4 years as well. It has been an honor to bring the Wednesday and Encore series to you, our membership, and I hope that you have enjoyed the series as much as I have. So 4 years ago, we started off strong with social media as BS. Today, we are going to end even stronger with NAGC's 2018 Communicator of the Year, Lieutenant Donnie Brzuska of the U.S. Coast Guard. Lieutenant Johnny is joining us just ahead of the Communications School and the announcement of our 2019 Communicator of the Year. Johnny was a leader who helped solidify the U.S. Coast Guard's role as a global leader in polar operations. His outreach initiatives using traditional and social media reached over 1 billion people worldwide and highlighted the threat of transnational crime networks. Lieutenant Brzuska also led the deployment of more than 24 communications professionals to multiple regions impacted by natural disasters, and he led a national delegation during the transfer of a former Coast Guard cutter to Vietnam. There are few communicators who have the opportunity to work on such a scale once a year, but Lieutenant Brzuska did so several times in 2017, and his commander said that he represented the U.S. Coast Guard and government communicators exceptionally. Donnie has a sharp mind, a good heart, and a sly wit, and he's going to give us a wonderful hour of his time, and I'm so pleased that he is able to join us to talk about what he learned when he stopped trying to sound smart and other revelations of his time as a communicator with the Coasties. Donnie, I want to thank you so much for being here today. We are very happy to have you.
Thanks, it's my pleasure.
Oh, it is? I'm glad. It's my pleasure too. So we're going to get started in a minute. First, we'll go through our monthly housekeeping items, and then we'll give Donnie the floor. First off, Q&A. So Donnie is going to go ahead and take questions throughout his presentation. You can go ahead and submit those through your question box, and we will take them as he's able to take pauses during his comments. I also want to talk a little bit about the summer schedule. We'll have a new professional development director inducted into the office at the Communications School in June. We will not have a Webinar Wednesday in June since we will be in DC for the Communications School. We will pick up again in July and August and October. July, August, September, right? And during that time, we will be presenting the 2019 Communicator of the Year, our 2019 Best in Show Award winners, and also how to win a Blue and Pencil Gold Screen Award in 2020. So keep an eye out on your email and the nagc.com website for announcements about upcoming presentations. And as they're scheduled, we will put those registrations up. But do remember, it's the third Wednesday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern. So always, except for June, you can watch for a Webinar Wednesday during those time slots. Also, just a reminder, 2019 Communications School is coming up. We have advanced training workshops on the 25th. The school itself is on the 26th and 27th. We'll do Pencil Gold Screen Awards ceremony during that time. We've got a full fat agenda, which is on the website, and early bird registration is still good through close of business today. So if you have some time, get your registrations in, and we will see you in DC at the end of June. Also coming soon are elections for our new board of directors. Information is at nagc.com. So consider running or consider joining a committee. We would love to have you involved. I probably don't need to say how much I love volunteering for NAGC, and I will not be stepping too far away. Once I am cycled off the board after my tenure here, I will certainly be doing something else. So I will see you guys at the Communications School and then on a committee near you. And honestly, I think that's all we have for housekeeping today. Donnie, I'm ready to turn the reins over to you. If you'd like to go ahead and share your screen and get started. While you're doing that, I just want to say again, thanks so much for joining us. We're thrilled to have you, and we will see you. I will see you in a couple of minutes when you're ready for Q&A.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, Bethany. It's kind of cool to be on a webinar with the Bethany Hornbeck. It's pretty awesome. You don't get that opportunity every single day. I enjoy watching the webinars. They're a great tool for our membership, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. an opportunity that I never thought I would actually ever have, per se. By the way, hello from Washington, D.C., a beautiful Coast Guard headquarters. I wasn't on a trajectory to be a communicator of the year. I barely graduated the high school and joined the Coast Guard on a whim. I needed a waiver to become a public affairs specialist. So being named the government communicator is not any kind of effort of my own or any product of my own skill. I am certainly just the product of a lot of hard work from very patient mentors and colleagues. And so some who I think are on the webinar today. And so I'm grateful for those folks. The title of my webinar is What Happened When I Stopped Trying to Sound Smart. And it's kind of tongue in cheek, but as professional communicators, sometimes we get wrapped around the axle. We're trying to create strategic messages. We're trying to influence the narrative or shape the narrative or whatever DC long pole in the tent buzzword you want to come up with. We're trying to do it, and we can get caught up in that minutia and those details and really lose sight of what matters. And so that's the purpose of this presentation, is to really talk about what happens when we kind of let go and really focus on what matters. And I'm going to talk to you through just a couple of revelations in my career and my life that kind of shaped my perspective as a communicator. And I'll share just my thoughts on failure and how failure is not a dirty word. And then managing up. How can you use your executive as an asset and an advocate for your brand and for your organization? And then I'll go through the 4 Ps. And these are things that we've found in Coast Guard Public Affairs and I found out throughout my career that really make a great public affairs officer, communicator, communication office, PIO, just an all-around great, a great communicator. So we'll get started with the first kind of revelation in my life. And it was as a communicator, my life as a communicator. Rewind 2000, the year 2000. I was a new coastie, newly minted, and was walking around the mall because that's what 18-year-olds did at the time when they had nothing else to do. And I stopped in a store that you may remember called The Hot Topic. It was a place where a lot of like really horrible, slightly inappropriate gifts could be found, bad t-shirts, and epic posters. So I go in and I see this young lady that I'm quite interested in, and I'd like to get her phone number. And I walk up to her and I'm like, hey, what's your phone number? And we start talking, and she asks me what I do. And I tell her I'm in the US Coast Guard. She cocks her head, kind of looks at me and says, is that like the National Guard or something? I was heartbroken, number one, that not everybody knew what the Coast Guard is. Number two, it was a major revelation in my life. I told myself after that moment of humiliation, not that the National Guard is bad, love the National Guard, but you know, I'm in the Coast Guard, that not everybody knows what we do in the United States Coast Guard. And as I've gone through my career, I realized that was a pivotal moment that I committed to improving the brand awareness of the United States Coast Guard. And brand awareness is essentially that people know you exist and they know what you do and why you do it, right? That's the simplest way to put it. And so how do you improve your brand awareness? Well, the first thing you got to do is assess your brand offerings. And what does that mean? It means, what exactly is it that you do? What do you offer the people that you serve, right? So for instance, everybody knows that the Coast Guard does search and rescue. You would literally have to be living under a rock for the past 10 years to have not seen some Coast Guard helicopter or some coastie pulling somebody off of a roof or out of peril or whatever. Everybody knows that we do rescues, but not everybody knows that we seized, 1 million pounds of cocaine in the past 3 years and arrested over 1,800 suspected smugglers. Most people don't know that we're the only agency in the federal government capable of reaching both poles, the North Pole and the South Pole, and conducting polar operations and projecting significant naval force into littorals in areas like, the Middle East. So what do you offer? And then how do those offerings fit into a broader context, right? So you really have to think about what you offer and then tie it to a national issue, topic, something of interest, right? Really figure out where you fit in the world. And so, for instance, when I was at Coast Guard Pacific area and we were in charge of communicating for the counter drug program, we could have showed dope on deck all day long. And people would have been impressed with that. We can literally fill up an entire flight deck with 30,000 pounds of cocaine and get tons of coverage. But that didn't really talk about our missions in a broader context. It talks about just the dope. It talks about what we do, right? So what we really started communicating is how we attack transnational organized crime networks. And I know that's a mouthful, but it really is a problem, because these transnational organized crime networks are undermining stability and prosperity in Central America, which is leading to increased violence and increased immigration to the US southern border. So inserting ourselves in that conversation raises the awareness of the average individual, and then it also opens up our touch points. So how many people are interested in what we do. And the other thing that you have to do when you look at your brand offerings, what are your limitations and what are your opportunities? When we sat down, sat around a table to talk about our brand per se in the Coast Guard, we know that search and rescue and environmental protection are pretty much covered. We don't have to spend a whole lot of time telling that story. That story kind of tells itself. But not a lot of people know that we possess the only two medium and heavy endurance icebreakers in our fleet, and that we're the only U.S. agency capable of reaching Antarctica by ship, and that we are the primary provider for getting scientific and replenishment supplies to the Antarctic each year. So there's incredible opportunity there to tell that story and talk about what we do in other ways. And so when we developed our brand portfolio, we categorized our missions based on things that we wanted people to know that they necessarily didn't already aware of, or where there are opportunities for growth. And when we do that, we expand awareness to not just the things that you do, but to the problems that you solve. And that's the most important thing. As a government agency, that's what we do. We solve problems. We fix things for people. We provide power. We provide water. We keep communities safe. If there's a fire, we put it out. We're government agencies. We fix things for people. Let's talk not only about what we do, but the problems that we solve. All right, and remember, anytime you can jump in with questions. I welcome them, and at any time. So I'll move on to the next one, though. So that handsome dude on the left, I'm in the middle. My wife's on the right. The handsome dude on the left, that's my dad. Major Gary Brzuska, U.S. Air Force, retired. He's an amazing dude, my biggest fan, great all-around American. In 2001, after my first deployment with the United States Coast Guard, I came home and I was telling my dad about my deployment, how we interdicted all these drugs, we picked up migrants, I got to help care for the migrants, how we were gone and we were chasing drug smugglers for days at a time, and just all these really cool stories. And he looked at me and he was like, "Hey, that's funny. I never saw that on headline news," because that's what people used to watch back then when they weren't trying to get like real, true kind stories or whatnot. So that was kind of that was also an eye-opening thing for me. My dad wasn't trying to be mean or disrespectful. It just was completely counterintuitive to everything that he felt about the United States Coast Guard. Again, he felt that we were a life-saving service, right? That we were this entity that operated close to the United States, not further than 12 miles out. And so my stories contradicted his feelings about the organization. And that's what influence, brand influence is. It's how people feel about your brand. And developing that feeling is not something that you can just get with grand slam opportunities, like that one hit on GMA and then give up. No, that brand influence is built over numerous touch points, probably countless touch points, with engagements with all of your stakeholders over time. And it's something that you have to constantly plan for and succeed at. And so whenever you develop content, whenever you plan to communicate, whenever you're developing anything where people will interact with your stakeholders, you need to think about how you need to think about what the audience won't learn, but how will the audience feel? How will they feel when you tell them this story? If you're seeking to teach or educate, those are great goals. But honestly, the average person gets inundated with thousands and thousands and thousands of messages every single day. They may not remember what you tell them, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And it's our job as communicators to make them feel positive about our organization and the people that we serve. All right. So this next revelation comes to you in 2014. I had just reported to Coast Guard Pacific area, and I was in charge of communicating Coast Guard drug operations in the Pacific. Coca production was through the roof, and there was a glutton of cocaine in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Central and South America. And literally, crews were interdicting so much cocaine that they couldn't manage it all. We didn't have enough space on the cutters for the suspects. It was literally a glutton of cocaine. And our Coast Guard men and women were doing incredible things, interdicting semi-submersible subs, chasing down high-speed drug smuggling vessels, outmaneuvering vessels trying to ram them. Amazing, incredible, and dangerous, but important work. And I wanted to tell that story because nobody was telling it. So I called up a crew that I just made an interdiction, and I said, hey, did you guys take any video of this interdiction? And he said, no, we can't take video. And everything that was written in a policy, everything that was in our strategic plans said that they could, but they didn't think they could. And culturally, they were ingrained not to for a variety of different reasons. So we looked at how could we make this change? It was simple. It was a simple cultural fix. We tell them that we enable them to take video for the purposes of law enforcement investigation, to serve as evidence, and for documentation. Oh, and by the way, we can use it for public affairs if it's cleared by the U.S. prosecutor. This is the first video that came in after we initiated that policy. The crew of the Coast Guard cutter Stratton coming aboard a self-propelled semi-submersible in probably off the coast of about 500 miles south of Mexico.
I don't think so either. All right, check this out.
They found 16,000 pounds of cocaine on this vessel, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We released this video a couple days after the interdiction, and it was placed in hundreds of television shows, news outlets within days, and reached millions of people, all because of one cultural fix. And that's the thing with trying to think smart. Thinking smart doesn't always work because culture will always outdo strategy. I love this quote by Peter Drucker, a business manager expert. He says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I couldn't agree more. You can come up with the most amazing, most detailed, most well-researched communication strategy for your organization and your people, and it'll still fail because the people in your organization haven't bought in or your culture doesn't sustain it. So before you implement your strategy, really take an account as to whether or not your culture will support it. And if there are barriers in your organization, in your culture, that are prohibiting you from succeeding and communicating your important work to the people you serve, then focus on changing that incrementally. As we all know, you can't change culture overnight, and attempts to make big cultural changes all at once will usually fail. So look at those small wins. One policy change, one small order, one authorization, and keep going. You change culture in a marathon pace, not in a sprint. One other thing, important revelation from this, is that the power of decentralization. You can't just tell the story from the office. You have to push out the responsibility of communications to your entire workforce. Your entire workforce needs to tell their story and feel empowered to tell their story. Set up systems and processes that will support them in that, and then that will provide them top cover if things don't go necessarily as planned. So then you take all these revelations, your enhanced brand awareness, your better understanding of how you can influence your audiences. You take your opportunities to grow and you look for how your culture can support your strategy, not your strategy supporting your culture. And then you write it all down and you tell everyone. A plan not written down is not a plan at all. When we developed our communication strategy, we put it in this little document on the right called Our Brand. And it basically, and we pushed it out to all 13,000 employees in Pacific area who serve across basically an area the size of half the globe. And we not only told them what we wanted them to say, we empowered them to tell their story and in their own unique way. We gave them free rein to go out and be spokespersons, to be ambassadors for our brand. And that's what happens when you write it down and you send it out. So any questions yet? All right, moving on. All right, so failure. We got to talk about that 4-letter word that starts with F. And we as communicators have to change our perspective about failure. Whenever somebody fails in communication, they mess up at a press briefing, they write the wrong thing, they say the wrong thing, we immediately jump to analysis and criticism, and we have to do better. Failure is not a dirty word. We will all make mistakes. Trust me. Take it from a guy who used the admiral's wrong name in a press briefing more than once, who misspoke at a press briefing numerous times, who has done numerous things on camera to embarrass himself, so many that I couldn't even go into them all. You will make mistakes. Mistakes are not bad. Mistakes are learning opportunities, and that's how we should think about them. And then we should always celebrate smart failure. Eddie Obing does this really good TED Talk about smart failure, and I hope that you'll check it out maybe after this or later. He talks about smart failure as not a failure because of a lack of action or not because you did something wrong, but because you deliberately made an informed decision to do something that has never been done before. And that's smart failure. And we in government communications should strive for smart failures all the time. I would never be the communicator of the year if I hadn't failed. We implemented a media embed program. We put more than 12 reporters embedded in Coast Guard units across the world in less than a year. But for every embed that we successfully pitched, 3 failed. We had a 75% failure rate in our media embed program. By all it counts, by all intents and purposes, the program was a complete failure. But when we hit big. Associated Press, front cover of the Washington Post, ABC Nightly News. We made big wins because smart failure isn't failure at all. It's trying. And then one other thing I hope to impart with you. We have to stop thinking about people who do fail. I like to call this paradigm the fallen shipmate mentality. In the United States Coast Guard, when a service member dies in the line of duty, we don't immediately criticize their action. We don't immediately analyze what happened. We honor their memory. We respect the fact that they were brave enough and they were courageous enough to take the risk to do something great, to achieve the unachievable. And that's how we should think about people who take the risk, who step out in front of the camera, who try to tell the story, who try to do something new. We should treat them as a fallen shipmate. And then as we go through these smart failures, as we make mistakes, use that iteration as an opportunity for growth. And of course, capture lessons learned and share them. Because if you write it down, it didn't exist. So failure. Any questions? No? I'm gonna roll on.
Okay, keep going.
Okay. As some of you may know, 800,000 employees were impacted by a temporary or a partial lapse in federal funding over the holiday season. The Coast Guard was caught and embroiled in the middle of that. And unfortunately, the Coast Guard became the first armed force to go without a paycheck in our nation's history because our funding resides in the Department of Homeland Security. It was a difficult time for our organization. The average age of our Coast Guard members is about 21 to 22, and the bulk majority of our employees live at or just below the poverty line. So any lapse in funding was horrendous. I mean, I hadn't saved up 3 months of income when I was 22. And so as we struggled through this, people began to look to our leadership for support and for guidance. The guy on the left is Admiral Carl Schultz. He's my boss, the Commandant of the United States Coast Guard. The guy on the right, that's Master Chief Petty Officer Jason Vanderhayden, the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Commandant and the senior most enlisted person in the United States Coast Guard. On January 22nd, Admiral Schultz shot this video in a message to his crew.
Shipmates, thank you for continuing to stay on the watch. The Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, myself, and your senior leadership team, as well as the American public, stand in awe of your continued dedication to duty and resilience of that and your families. We're 5+ weeks into the anxiety and stress of this government lapse and your non-pay. You, as members of the armed forces, should not be expected to shoulder this burden. I remain heartened by assistance available to you within the lifelines and by the outpouring of support from local communities across the nation. But ultimately, I find it unacceptable that Coast Guard men and women have to rely on food pantries and donations to get through day-to-day life as service members.
That took incredible bravery.
Shipmates.
Nope, we don't want to watch it again. That took incredible bravery, incredible courage on behalf of those two leaders in our organization to step up and tell their people that was unacceptable, given how volatile the communication environment was at the time. But I can assure you, and so let me tell you kind of the impacts. That video was viewed over 1.5 million times on Twitter, thousands of comments, was embedded in just about every single major news network's webpage, ran on live TV. The unacceptable video, as it's been dubbed, became viral. But that didn't happen overnight. When Admiral Schultz took command of the United States Coast Guard back in June, he was skeptical and not necessarily comfortable with social media. And so we, as government communicators, are constantly feeling like, why doesn't the boss get it? Why doesn't he just approve it? Doesn't he see the bigger picture here? And we have to think differently about our executives, about our agency leads. Because you, as a professional communicator, may have an advanced degree in communications. You may have certifications. You may have gone to the NAGC communicator school. You have advanced training in communications. Your agency head likely does not. I think it's always hilarious that I have Coast Guard officers who literally take 400-foot ships and drive them into walls of ice, or fly Coast Guard helicopters into the heart of a storm, or sail over the horizon to fight America's wars. But they're nervous on camera, or they're afraid to engage with media. They see more risk in talking to a reporter than their own missions. And that's because they've been doing their missions every day for pretty much their whole lives. They didn't get there by accident. So we have to think about our executives as trainees. You have to train them to be successful communicators. And you don't just take the new ensign and throw them on a Coast Guard cutter and say, hey, good luck, drive the ship down to South America, interdict a bunch of drugs and come home. It doesn't work that way. You start by getting a lot of training, by getting experience. And only after years of experience do you get that opportunity. And it's the same with communicating with your executives. Start small and train up. Treat them as trainees. Obviously, you got to be respectful. But don't just launch right into the GMA interview, the live Good Morning America interview. Start small. Invite reporters out for a town hall. Invite somebody out from your local paper to talk with them in a non-threatening, really kind of positive news story. And train them up. The more that they engage with reporters, the more comfortable they'll feel. And then anytime you go to them with an idea, make sure you're communicating risks and how to manage that risk. Because we're talking about fire chiefs, police officers, executives who live in a world of risks and manage risks. And what is the ROI if I do this? If you come to them with some crazy idea, and trust me, I have a lot of crazy ideas. If you don't come with them for a way to manage the risks and protect them and the organization from those risks, then the answer when you have a new idea is always going to be no. For instance, whenever we started doing media embeds on Coast Guard cutters during counter-drug patrols, people were wildly concerned about how that would impact ongoing law enforcement investigation. What would be the safety of our service members? And would our service members say something out of turn? And we came with ideas on how we could manage for those risks. And then whenever you go in to pitch an idea to your boss, always shoot for the stars, but know that you may have to settle with just making it out of orbit. Because not every idea is a good idea, even though you think it is. And not every time is the right time. So when you go into your boss's office, always have at least 3 or 4 good ideas, good alternatives that you can easily lean on if the first idea gets shut down. Always be prepared to say, if we don't do this, this will happen. And if we do, this will happen. Know the outcomes. And there will be times in your organization where something bad happens. People are in chaos. There is peril, whatever it is. Just remember that it's your job as the professional communicator to be the calm in the storm and not just another piece of debris. So when people look to you, they're looking to you for smart, deliberate, and well-thought answers to complex communication challenges. Be that communicator that can offer that, and your managers will always respect you. So that's managing up. So the next thing, I'm going to fly through these, the maximum of public affairs. We wrote these into our communication strategy for Pacific area because we realized, any questions, Bethany? Are we good? No?
From participants, I've got a couple, but I'll hold mine until the end of your talk. So
Roger that. Okay.
Submit your questions through your questions box whenever they come up. We'll go through.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks. This is definitely weird. Bethany told me it would be weird that you're like talking to nobody. I'm in like an empty room, just talking to a computer, and I have no feedback. So it's just really, it's an interesting dynamic. So anyways, all right. So the maxims of public affairs. So we looked at successful public affairs programs. When I was in Pacific area, we had several regional offices that managed public affairs. And we looked at what made not only the offices successful, but also what made the public affairs specialists and public affairs officers in those regions successful too. And we really narrowed it down to 4 qualities. And please bear with me. I'm going to sound like a life coach just for a minute, but I think it'll have a good ending. Okay. So the first one is to be proactive. Get out of the office. Get with the people that tell the story. Never let there be downtime. Anticipate and plan. Build relationships. Those PAs who were the most successful, those public affairs specialists who were the most successful, looked for opportunities everywhere and then exploited them. They didn't just come up with ideas, they executed ideas. Be proactive. What can you do right now, right this minute, to tell your story and further your agency's objectives? Be proactive. Be progressive. So always look for the next big thing. What's the new tool? What are the new experiences? Shake up those processes. Look for opportunities to make incremental change to culture. And then one thing that I love is that the default answer has to always be yes. So when that reporter calls you up, that community group calls you up, and they want to do something with you, you should try hard to get to yes. Your default answer should be yes, let me check back. I got to see if we can do it. And then only fall back on no when policy or availability limit you. Try to always go for yes. Because saying yes means you're doing. And doing means you're making things happen. And always be afraid of people saying that's how it's always been, because it doesn't always have to be that way. It's your job as a professional communicator to provide the context, counsel, and content that will change that paradigm, change your organization for the better. Be progressive. Be purposeful. You support operations. You enable work, the important work of your agency to get done. Think big picture. You further the strategy of your organization. You further the operational intent of your commander. Because of you, the American people know about what your agency does. And then, most importantly, brief it up. Make sure that you're capturing the scope of your work and briefing it up to your boss. Every time you go into a meeting, be ready with at least 2 or 3 good good examples of successes by you and your team. So that way you can showcase the great work that you're doing. And finally, you have to be passionate. This is an office job. I had a good mentor named Buddy Dye who would tell me, you can't tell the Coast Guard story from the office. And he was right. The story that resonates the most is told from the front lines. You work for police officers. You work for firefighters, utility crews, you name it. You work for people who do important work. You can't effectively tell their story from the office when the majority of the great work that they do happens in the field. Get out of the office. That's going to make you more passionate. And then you get to live the story that you're going to tell. Remember, there is no successful operations without outreach. If an operation happens and nobody knows about it, is it really a success? I would argue not, because the people you serve have no idea what you just did. And then never underestimate the impact of your mission. I watched some of these amazing webinars. I've heard some of the stories about the communicator awards that have gone out from NAGC. The communicators today are doing amazing things to make a positive impact, not only in people's lives, but to the missions of their organization. And if you need something to be passionate about, just remember, you write tomorrow's history today. And if you think I'm over-exaggerating, I'd like to meet Seaman Amanda Wolf. Seaman Amanda Wolf was on patrol with her Coast Guard crew near Chicago, Illinois in 2017 when they got waved down by a recreational boater. This 2-year-old child had fallen off of her vessel, was unresponsive, was not breathing, and didn't have a pulse. Seaman Wolf jumped on board the vessel and immediately administered CPR. While the parents stood watching, weeping, Seaman Amanda Wolf went to work, something that she had trained for numerous times over. Compressions, breath, compressions, breath. Until finally, the little girl breathed out and made a full recovery. See, Amanda Wolf didn't jump on that vessel to make history. The Coast Guard saves 10 lives every single day. Amanda Wolf jumped on that vessel because it was her job. It's something that she does every single day. It's our job as professional communicators to take the everyday and make it history. And if you can't get compassionate, if you can't get passionate about that, I don't know what you can get passionate about. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm open for questions.
Oh, that was fantastic, Donnie. Thank you so much. And what a great story to end on. Look, I'm all verklempt. So folks, if you have questions, let me know. And then I would like to ask a couple. Thank you for the story about Amanda at the end. That was wonderful. How did you go about pushing communications out to your workforce and marshaling the efforts of everybody and kind of allowing them to tell their own stories?
Well, we're really fortunate in that the policy of the organization essentially says everybody's a spokesperson. The problem is that not everybody knows that, right? Because the policy sits in a manual on a shelf in some obscure Coast Guard headquarters building, and it never gets taken out and dusted off, especially by these guys and gals who are, you know, saving lives and stopping drugs and fighting and winning America's wars. They're super busy. And so we found that you have to put it in a format that is a vehicle that they're used to seeing, and you have to put it in a format that resonates with them. And so we wanted to just hit the bathrooms. And this, I'm not joking. Our goal was to print out glossies with nice pictures with our brand and make sure they end up in every single bathroom in the United States Coast Guard. And we all know that a lot of our professional development and a lot of our reading happens in the bathroom. And so that was kind of our goal. And it actually kind of worked really well. We saw people starting to, we started seeing these messages creep into people's lexicon. We started seeing, getting emails back from folks saying, hey, I read it, loved it, we're gonna do this. Do you got anything else? And so it was about, I guess, short answer, put it in a format that people will like and read, and then put it in a place that, you know, they're gonna find it.
All right, great. And Janelle Hillary would like to know, how do you avoid the political act that some media want to box us into these days? Are there any techniques you recommend?
Well, so we as the military are pretty insulated to politics per se. Not necessarily, sometimes we're on the receiving end of those other decisions, of political decisions, but we're an organization that remains apolitical at all times. And our members are required to remain apolitical. And I think if you always talk about what you do and you talk about your people, and then the way that they are solving problems, and focus on that, then you're going to be safe. And if somebody tries to push you into a corner or box you out, just say, hey, we don't do politics. That's not something we do. And most reporters, I think, are professional enough to know that they've reached their boundary.
That's a good answer. And then, so what happens when you fail exactly? I mean, what happens if somebody in the field speaks out of turn, or you made a mistake on camera? Can you tell us a little bit about sort of how you, it's good to say, you know, learn from your failure, but kind of how do you do that? Like, you know, oh man. And then, yeah, I mean, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, is there fallout from those failures, or do you make corrections to the media or corrections to the public or other?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it just depends on the situation. So I'll share you a personal story of mine, where I felt like I failed. I was doing a social media campaign in Cape May, New Jersey, where our basic training was. And we had written a cadence for a Coast Guard member who had recently passed away. And in honor of that Coast Guard member, we posted it on our social media sites. And the intent was good. We had talked with his previous command and let him know that we were going to do it, but the intent was good. Unfortunately, his wife didn't know it was coming and saw it on social media, and was very upset by that. And so we immediately pulled it down. We wrote a letter of apology to his widow, and she was very receptive to that apology and very understanding, and realized that we were well-intentioned, but we make mistakes. And I think the way to, you know, recovering from failure is just as important as learning from failure and saying, you know what, I made a mistake, boss. I'm sorry. Let me make this right for you. And doing the steps to fix it is the most important thing you can do.
And maybe treating yourself as a fallen soldier too.
That's right. I mean, we gotta realize that, like, we're not all perfect and we're not all knowing and we're gonna make mistakes, and you just gotta drive on.
Yes, I heard that. I don't know if I have many other questions, but I do have a comment from Lori Mayer, who says, wow, incredible presentation. She says, thank you for sharing your revelations. This is going to carry her far forward, long into the future as she works on making history.
Cool. Thanks, Lori. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody's time. And again, if you're not a member of NAGC, I hope you'll join. It's a great organization that not only provides great professional development opportunities that are specifically geared towards government communicators, but also advocates for our profession here in Washington and around the United States. And so I'm grateful for this opportunity, Bethany.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I don't know if you could hear me very well at the beginning because the internet here is offish today. But I do want to say thank you so much for joining me over here. It's been great. And this will be my last webinar. But thank you so much for having us, Donnie. It's been wonderful. And Anna Glover says, thank you for sharing these wonderful stories. She was thrilled to have you as well.
It's my pleasure. Thanks.
And I hope to see everybody in DC at the Communication School, right? Donnie, will you be with us?
I will be traveling. It's the second time I've missed it in 2 years, and I'm so sorry.
It's okay. We'll see you in 2020.
I'll be back at the next webinar, but you won't be hosting, so that'll be sad.
Yes, I know, that's all right. Well, we'll have a new professional development director, and he or she will do a fantastic job. And they'll take webinar Wednesdays where I'm not taking it yet, so that's all right. Janelle, thank you so much. She said thanks to both of us for ending a little early. So take a walk around the block and get yourself a little power surge, and we will see you at the Communication School in June or on webinar Wednesdays in July. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.